Okay. Recording in progress. Next time I have to remember to do it up front. Morning. Okay, so set down a little bit. Look at the overview, which is on page 150. And the Torah portion is Shalach. I just want to read that through and then we'll talk about it. It says, Moses sends 12 spies to the land of Canaan. 40 days later, they return. So where we are up to in the Torah is that the Jews have been at Mount Sinai. After they got the Torah, they're camped at Mount Sinai for almost a year. Then they started to get moving. And within a month or so, a saga happens. And this saga is tragic. And this saga is very well known in Torah. And that's what we're going to read about right now. But 90% of the Torah portion is devoted to the saga. And it said this way. Moses sends 12 spies to the land of Canaan. They're in the desert. They know going to Israel. Canaan is the future Israel. And he sends 12 spies for reconnaissance. 40 days later, they return carrying a huge cluster of grapes, a pomegranate, and a fig to report on a lush and bountiful land. The nature of the agriculture is amazing. So they can see from the fruits that how bountiful it is. But 10 of the spies warn that the inhabitants of the land are giants and warriors more powerful than we. So 10 of them say to the Jews, careful what you ask for. We don't want to go there. We're not going to be able to make it. And only 2 of the spies, Joshua was Moses' primary disciple, and Kalev, they are loyal to the mission, so to speak, and insist that the land can be conquered. How do they know? Because God told them that there will be, as God had commanded. People weep that they'd rather return to Egypt. This is unfortunately a pretty common thing, that the Jews say, oh, the good old days in slavery, what are we doing out here? God decrees that Israel's entry into the land shall be delayed 40 years, during which time that entire generation will die in the desert. God says, you know something, you don't want Israel, you're not going to get it. I'm not the generation, your kids' generation, anyone over 20 is going to die out in the desert, and their kids will end up going into Israel. A group of remorseful Jews stormed the mountain on the border of the land and are routed by the Amalekites and Canaanites. They say, oops, we didn't mean to, we pushed it too far, but it was too late. The laws of, then at the end, there's the laws of what are called menachot, which means certain types of offerings, meal offerings, meal, wine, and oil offerings are given, as well as the mitzvah to consecrate a portion of the dough, challah. This is where challah comes from. It's challah is not a Shabbos bread. It's actually, the challah is a tithe of bread. Talk about that another time. It became known as a Shabbos bread, but it's just that when we make dough, when you're baking bread, you're supposed to take off some of it for charity. And that was called challah. And the only time people baked was for Friday, for Shabbos. So the whole bread became called challah. The God of making bread. A man violates the Shabbat by gathering sticks and is put to death. God instructs us to place fringes, tzitzis, on the 4 corners of our garments, like we're wearing right here, like we have in the talis. So we should remember to fulfill the mitzvahs, the divine commandments. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share for a moment. I'm just going to actually mute all also, just to make sure we got that. Okay.
Are you recording?
Yes, that's how we got delayed. So the Torah portion has we're going to call it a tragic story, where God is taking the Jews out of Egypt. He said, I'm taking you out of Egypt for a purpose. I'm taking you out of Egypt because I want you to be a nation. I want you to be a nation in your own land. I want you to go to Israel. We're going to first go to Sinai. You're going to get the rules for the relationship. You're going to get the Torah. It's going to be our constitution. And from there, you're going to go on to Israel. It should not take you anything close to 40 years. Why does it take 40 years? Because it took them a year to get going with the tabernacle. That's on the house. Afterwards, they should have been going straight to Israel. Problem was that as they're preparing to go into Israel, Moses says, and we'll explain why he says, I'm going to send spies. Now, why does Moses have to send spies? God said, go into Israel and conquer it. Moses does send spies, but he figures, they're going to go, they're going to see, and they'll come back. And this way they'll know how to conquer it. Not going to just work on miracles. They're going to try to figure out the best way in. They come back and they disappoint the people, they depress the people, they demoralize the people. There's a rebellion in the people. They don't want to go to Israel, and God says, okay, you won't. It'll be only the younger generation. Which the reason that the Jews wander for 40 years in the desert is not that we're wandering trying to figure out the right way. It was that they did not have permission to go in until that generation had died out. So now let's get into the Torah portion a little bit. And the Torah portion is going to focus on the balance that we have in relationships between acceptance. Someone really matters. Let's say my father asked me to do something. I would say my wife, but let's say talk about, I have the dynamic between me and my father, my parents is one of authority. If he asked me to do something, likely I'm going to do it. You know why? Because he asked me to do it. It's about the relationship. I make space in my life for what he wants. Now, that is the foundation of the relationship. But with my father, especially at his age, I say, why do you need this? I would like to understand it. Not that I'm disagreeing with him, not that I'm challenging him, but I want to understand it. Now, so there's my acceptance, which at some level is kind of blind. Father asked me, it's important to him. Unless I think it's going to hurt him, the answer is, of course, yes. But then the question is, I want to understand it too. Why do I want to understand it? Because I want to have my brain in sync with the mission, so it makes sense to me. I'm just not blind. Maybe he's asking me something that his doctors wouldn't want. I have to check it out. So there's a balance between what we're going to call the more absolute acceptance and then the analysis. And where does that fit? How does that work between us and God? So let's go back to sharing the screen. And we have text one. Let's get this out. So Moses describes what happened. Now, at the end of the Torah, when Moses reviews his life, the last fifth book of the Torah is all a review. In the last 5 weeks of Moses' life, he talks to the Jews and recaps everything for them before he dies. So he goes through this episode. The way in his retrospective, he says, text one, you all approached me. You remember back then, 39 years ago? You guys came to me and said, let's send men to search out the land and bring back a word about which route we should ascend and which cities we should enter. You came to me, says, do you remember? You came to me with what sounds like a reasonable request. We're going into Israel. We're a ragtag band of people. We're not an army. They're fierce tribes. God's behind us. Let's check out what we're going to do. Let's just not walk in blind. Reasonable request. Text 2a, we find that what Moses actually went to God and said, here's the request. What do I do? And God's request on 2a is, God says to Moses, that's the way this week's Torah portion opens up, send out men for yourself to scout the land of Canaan that I'm giving to the Jews. So God's response is, send spies. I'm in. Except it's an odd language. Send out men for yourself. Just send spies. What's the for yourself? If we look at text 2b, okay. Send for yourself as you understand. I'm not telling you to send. If you want to send, send. Send for yourself. He's telling Moses, okay, if that's what you want, do it. If that's what you think is a good idea, do it. Now, Moses is used to management telling him what to do. It's not, you say, God, should I or shouldn't I? It's God. So here he says, the people want to send me to send scouts. What do I do, boss? And God says is, if that's what you want to do, go for it. Now, you'd think maybe he'd say, that's a very, very lukewarm endorsement. Maybe there's something wrong with this. What is it? What's Moses thinking? But he takes it and he says, okay, I'm going to do it. And he sends these spies. Now, the spies were going to check out the route, the military approach, helped get back a reconnaissance for strategy, military strategy. Then there was something else also. Taken out of Egypt, and God promises them not only that they're out of the hell of slavery, but they're going towards a much better life. They're going to have a Torah, they're going to have a land, they're going to have bountiful blessing. That's what they're told. So Moses asked them, don't just go and check out the best route in and where the weaker points in are in defenses of different tribes. What's it like? I want you to come back and tell everybody. 3a, what is the nature of the soil? Is it fat or lean? Are the trees or not? Gird yourselves and take from the fruit of the land. This is, I want you to bring back species. Oops, sorry. Okay. Yes.
2b is a very Yiddish statement. If you want to said.
Yes. I have so many examples in my head. But yes. But you'd think that God would give us some more clarity. So here he says also, go and I want you to bring back specimens. Now, why does he say gird yourselves and take from the fruit of the land? What's that? What does the gird yourselves mean? So go look at 3b, the great Nachmanides points out, gird yourselves with courage and take fruit. Taking fruit would be a dangerous thing. Why? Because you're trying to go in there incognito. You're spies. You don't look like them. They don't know you. You're people that are from outside the neighborhood. Okay, you wandered in from another tribe. Hopefully you can blend in. You're a group of 12, not so simple, but you're going to try. But then when you start taking, specimens, not to eat, but clearly you're going to show it to someone or some people, you're going to alert people. I mean, there must be some border at that point, border patrol. Say, where are you guys going? What are you doing with all this? So he says, gird yourselves with courage and take fruit. Don't be afraid that if you take from the fruit of the land, you might be exposed as spies. So this was Moses had a two-track intent and objective in sending the Jews. First is he wanted to be able to get the military strategy to be able to make it in to Israel, and then he wanted to get the Jews, have them see what the fruit of the land is like. So the questions are, number one, why did Moses go with this? If God said, well, if you want to, you can send them. What was Moses' point? Did Moses have any doubt that no matter what, they were going to be able to conquer the land? If God is with them, that's there's no greater military force behind them. He did. Certainly he did. Why did he send them? What was his point in sending them? And why did he ask them to bring from the fruit if that could have endangered them? He didn't have a promise from God that his spies would be okay. Why would he put them at some peril? So now we're going to get into the core of what this whole discussion is about, what this morning discussion is about.
153. Thank you very much.
Yes. 154 now. So this is a quote from text 4. The primary reason to perform a mitzvah is that God commanded it. This is greater than all other intentions. I'm going to stop right there. If, like I said before, if my father told me to do something, a relationship, a very meaningful relationship, has its foundation and its, we'll call it the foundation and the structure. Foundation is, if someone who really means a lot to me asks me for something, my instinct is yes. That's the foundation. I make space in my life for someone important to me, family, whatever it may be. But then I may ask questions about what is it that you want, And what are you trying to achieve? It doesn't mean necessarily that I'm questioning that I think it's a wrong thing, but I want to understand it and not just, go and obey. But the foundation is, you matter to me. And if you ask me, the instinct is, of course, yes. So from that perspective, we turn to God. Someone comes in here and says, Rabbi, I just found out I'm Jewish. I'm thrilled, and this never happened to me, but I'm thrilled, and I just, what am I supposed to do? Tell me what to do. So there's the thing. I want to do the right thing. So they're open to it. So you want to say, we do this. We're going to pray every morning. And then explain it. I want them to understand it. Because it's important for the exercise. But the foundation of it is, this is what we do. So let's say if someone puts up a mezuzah. They're going to put up a mezuzah. They ask me, they want to put up a mezuzah in their house, and how do I put up a mezuzah? Found out Jews put up mezuzahs. I don't have mezuzahs. Get me a kosher mezuzah. So I get a mezuzah, get 2 nails and a hammer. I say, great. Now you can put up a mezuzah. They can stand by a doorway, make a blessing, knock in 2 nails, or use double-sided tape, and put it on, and they completed the mitzvah. They've done a mitzvah. Check. Now, what happens if we sit and say, I'm not just giving you a mezuzah. It's in the mezuzah. It's a scroll. The scroll has the Shema. The Shema proclaims oneness of God and oneness of the universe with God. It's bringing home to us that there's a oneness between us all. There's a godliness in all the universe, and therefore what goes on in this room or in this house, when you're putting up the mezuzah, you want it to be in sync with the oneness of the world. And now, when that person goes home, they don't just knock into 2 nails. They're thinking and they're feeling and saying, I like this. I relate to this. Now what I'm doing is I'm doing something which connects me with something higher. Those are 2 very, very different scenes. One is just knocking in nails, which is the mitzvah. But then, you know what? Which part of my body, the person's body, is connecting with God? Their hands. They're knocking in nails. When intellectually and emotionally they're in gear and engaged, that's all poured into their hands. So when they do that mezuzah, knocking the mezuzah, it's really there's a holistic connection with God, because they understand something, because they feel something, and now they're doing something. So the idea of sheer acceptance is a beginning, but it's only a beginning. Judaism is not asking that we just look at the list of to-do things, and the Torah it has a lot of to-do things. And it's a book of instruction, right? It's not a book of history, it's a book of instruction. Just to say, just tell me what to do. I don't want to hear the details. I don't want to understand it. That's a very dry and to some extent hollow religious experience. You're just doing.
How is that different?
Go ahead.
In essence, from a golem who is following the orders of God's agent?
I don't see much of a difference, except that the person has a soul and the golem doesn't. You're right. So here, it's the point is, the point of departure is acceptance. Yes, tell me what to do. But that's only a point of departure. You got to build on it. So we don't want to say, well, forget about that. I'm not just going to accept. I'm going to look at the Torah, and I'm going to decide what floats my boat. And those are the things I'll do. That means what I'm saying is that it's not about a relationship. It's about me. Imagine me telling my parents, this example I used before, of course, for my parents, I'm going to do for you everything that makes sense to me. But it's about me. I'm the center. They're part of my orbit. They're making space for someone else. It's a spouse, whoever it is. It's not about me. I want to hear what you need. I want to hear what you want. I'm allowed to ask questions, and I want to understand it. But the first thing is, if you want it, it matters to me. So that core is very important. It's a foundation. So here in this text 4, he's saying, he brings an example, Nadav and Avihu. Nadav and Avihu are two sons of Aaron, and they were very spiritually advanced people. And because they wanted to get a peek at the divine, there's a kind of an enigmatic story in the Torah, but just from this way of framing it, they went into the inner sanctuary at a time when it wasn't the right time. They just were dying to go in there, so they died. They went in and they died. They had a wonderful surge. They want to be able to embrace God. They want to get into the apex of the connection with the human and the divine, and therefore they went into the sanctuary, the inner sanctuary. So look, none of them, some of the greatest Jews of that time had many lofty intentions. What did they want? They weren't trying to hurt anyone or rebel against God. They just wanted to connect with God. Yet they were punished for doing something you were not instructed to do. When applied to the positive, this principle is even more compelling. It tells us that simply performing a mitzvah with no understanding, purely out of obedience to God, is loftier than all sacred intentions. There is an absolute beauty to that. When often a person will come in here, pretty often, depending on of a certain generation, before they come in, they want to put on a yarmulke. They're coming in to pick up something. They're coming in to bring a book, whatever. They're not going to walk into the building without a yarmulke. Nowhere in the world does it say you have to have a yarmulke to walk into shul. Nowhere in Judaism say you have to have a yarmulke to walk into a shul. Study Torah, we should have yarmulke. But they're walking into a shul to pick something up. Well, I don't have to put any yarmulke. There's a beauty. It's okay. There's a tremendous beauty to that to me, because they're saying it's a tradition. I don't know. This is what I do. This is what we do. That's what I want to do. And in my experience, there are I see that more. It's not a seldom thing where people have their things. Like, this is what I do. Why? Because I'm a Jew. I can't explain it, but this is what Jews do. That's a beautiful thing.
Demonstration of awareness that I'm someplace special.
It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. But I'm saying, to me, it's something of an example of where people they do it. I'm not sure they can explain it. Maybe you did explain it, but it's sometimes I will see. I wear yarmulke every day. I don't think about it. I've been wearing yarmulke since I'm 3 years old. So it's not like every morning I think, oh wow, I have this on top of me and I go into this meditation. I should, but I don't. I take it for granted. Someone comes in and they value this. Here's a yarmulke, and I have to put it on because I'm in a special place. What you're saying, there's a beauty to that I'm not experiencing. I have to admit, it's not something I'm going through. I can explain why I wear a yarmulke, but I'm not thinking about it right now. Someone who when there is the acceptance of this is the right thing, there are Jews. I don't want to get too far afield, but again, this is waning a little bit. Unfortunately, Jews go to shul Yom Kippur, Shana Yom Kippur for sure. Why? I'm not sure. Why? I'm not quite sure if Yom Kippur is more important than a Shabbos. But I don't want to say it too loud because then people won't come in Kippur either. And I respect it. I respect Yom Kippur Yom Shul. Beautiful. Is it more important than going to Shul Yom Kippur than Shabbos? I don't know, but I can't support that one. But the point is that it's great. If when people there's a surrender and an obedience to God, and that is really a beautiful thing. That's what he's talking about here. Now, once there's an obedience to God, but then there's the idea of understanding. Look at text 5a. Even in super irrational decrees, there are things in the Torah we have no explanation for. If you want to know, if someone says, Rabbi, why do we put up a mezuzah? I can explain it because the Torah tells me. Someone says, Rabbi, why do we make a Passover Seder? Torah tells me. So, Rabbi, why do we keep kosher? Because the Torah says so. There's no reasoning given in the Torah. A number of mitzvahs. They're super rational mitzvahs. Maimonides writes that even though there are Torah statutes that are super rational decrees, it is appropriate to meditate upon them and wherever possible provide a reason. He says, don't leave your mind at the door, even in a super rational decree. Recognize that you don't know the reason, but try and find a reason that matters to you. because it'll give you some enthusiasm in the mitzvah. Just blindly, like you said, like a golem, and dryly following, that's not a prescription for a relationship. You want to feel enthusiasm. You want to feel like your mind is engaged, your heart, it matters to you. That's not going to just be because out of blind obedience. So what he says is, the sages of the early generation said that King Solomon understood most of the rationales for all of the statutes of the Torah. So, and I mentioned before, and that comes to my mind now because I mentioned about kosher. Someone once told me that it's very hard for them to keep kosher, but now they're only going to 3 treif restaurants. Instead of the spectrum of the treif restaurants that they go to, they've narrowed it down to 3, which I thought was actually beautiful. Why? Because why do they do that? They do it because they're Jewish and they're realizing that they want to be able not to do that. So they're going to narrow it. It's a step. It was a gift to God. I never go to treif restaurants. Doesn't make that. There's no gift there. That's the way I was raised. It says to me, it's like breathing. There's no self-sacrifice there. It's just not my deal. But someone who has grown up with it, and it's a norm, and is saying, "I'm trying now to modify that." That's beautiful. So they're still going to a treif restaurant, but the fact is that they're doing something within their perspective to be able to do something for God. I think that's a real gift to God. So it says, or like one person said, I could do it on Wednesdays. I can keep kosher. So keep going on Wednesdays and kosher on Wednesdays. What's Tuesdays and Thursdays? That's between you and God. But it's a beautiful, make these steps because we're doing something for God. So there's this surrender idea, the obedience idea, but then we want to try and also make it make sense to us. And along these lines, text 5b, on 156, the Talmud relates that a rabbi named Rabbi Yirmiyah was sitting before his teacher named Rabbi Zera, and they were studying Torah. And now the time came for what we call mincha, the afternoon service. And Rabbi Yirmiyah hurried to complete his studies. So the student is thinking, time for mincha. We're studying. I got to rush up because I have to go catch mincha. When Rabbi Zera saw this, he proclaimed, one who turns his ear from hearing the Torah, his prayer is also an abomination. Very harsh words. But what he's saying, because the truth is, you're supposed to pray 3 times a day. And the fact that I was studying doesn't exempt me from it. Stop the studying, pray, and go back to studying if you want. But Rabbi Zera was giving him an insight. He says, if you don't study the Torah appropriately, no matter how mindful you are during prayer, your prayer is abominable. Okay, abominable is very strong language, but they're quoting this rabbi here, who's a contemporary, still alive. He's not a bad guy, so I don't have to defend him. You might pray to God with all your hearts, but you won't know who God is and how to worship Him properly. We want to understand as much as we can about God. We want to be able to not just. That's what Reb Zera was teaching him. He said you can't. Don't separate. But if prayer is about relating to God, talking to God, feeling a relationship with God, Torah is going to help you understand the relationship. You have a relationship with someone. Part of that relationship is knowing what makes them tick, knowing about how they feel, knowing about what they want. That's a relationship, making space for them and being curious to know what they want. Well, you want to be curious about God too. You want to be curious about what God wants of us and what gives God nachas, so to speak. So the study is a very important point. Now, people would say, there's one way of looking at it. Say, listen, I'm an intelligent human being. This is all new to me. I'm not doing any mitzvah until I rationally accept it. I've been told that a number of times. What that means is, I'm not doing mitzvahs unless you convince me to. Torah is not this is not advocating that. This is saying, if there's a relationship with God, what God wants, that should take a space in us. But it's not just because God said I'm going to do, even though I would. It's because I want to understand. God wants me to understand. God wants me to not just be a lemming or a golem, as you said, but to be a knowledgeable consumer or a knowledgeable partner so that we can feel what we're doing. If you look at text 6a, this is from the founder of Chabad, studying this too is God's will. God wants us to bind our minds and thoughts to him. God wants us to be mindful as we fulfill his commandments, recite the Shema, pray and chant the blessings. Not to just do things because this is our rote. This is our status quo. This is our habit. This is the way we were raised. That's not good. That's hollow. If you leave the house in the morning and they kiss a spouse and say, I love you, it should not just be that's what we do. And that's the road that we check, that's the on the checklist of things we do. It's to feel I'm saying word, that's a good thing. I want to put myself into it so that I actually mean it because that's going to come across. When we use our minds, the degree of divinity we channel is immeasurably greater than the divine will channeled by mindless fulfillment of his will, utilizing only our actions and our words. It's putting up a mezuzah without understanding and feeling. It's a mezuzah, but it's akin to me bringing my wife flowers on anniversary or birthday and just dropping them on the table and saying happy anniversary and walking and without any feeling. It's I did the action, check. But am I engaged? Am I feeling? Is it part of where I'm at?
Put them in water.
And plant food.
Yeah. The little packet.
Okay. So this is, and here we have from Isaiah 6b, bottom of 157, Isaiah complained in God's name, through Isaiah, gave this complaint to the Jewish people saying, people approach me with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are distant from me. They obey me by rote. That was a problem to Isaiah. That's a problem to God. If I'm in shul and I know the prayers by heart and I'm saying words and my mind is on a meeting I'm going to or I just came out of, my mouth is serving God, my heart and my mind are elsewhere. What am I doing? Now, at least I'm davening, but it's kind of a lame mitzvah. I'm not fully engaged, and that's what we're saying. So but God said to daven, so I daven. True, that's a great foundation. But make it real. Jewish anti-Semites?
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
It's legalistic without a soul. Soul was nucleated with the coming of their diet.
Right.
And that we are just broke, an empty function faith. And that's the basis of Christianity. It really is.
I can see why you say that. Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, they have to dance around that because they don't want to keep killing us. That is the basis.
But I think that there's probably been some truth to that for millennia. Not as you can't say that about Jews as a whole, we're all individuals. But has there been a mechanistic element to it? Of course there is.
But just like you put the yarmulke in the morning,
yeah,
and you don't think about it. The husband doesn't quite feel they're romantic, gives her the flowers.
Yeah,
it's a mitzvah,
right?
And it's not what you feel only; it's what you do.
And right, so we don't want to make it only about what you feel because
I'm feeling different every day.
And that's right. And what I teach my kids, my little ones, when they were little, to say, "I'm sorry, please, thank you." I hope they feel it too, but if they don't, they should say it anyway. But I don't want them to grow up thinking they have to say thank you only, but I want them to feel gratitude. I want them to feel sorry and not just say it, because that comes across too. So there's two important elements here. It's not one over the other. They're both. A person who only does what they feel, but doesn't do all the right things, that's not good. A person who does the right things but not feel, that's also not good. We want to do the right thing, but we want to feel the right thing also. Now, there's you'll understand that, as we're going to say, when the Jews are new, a lot of this, the Torah is not telling us the history of what happened in the desert. We're missing like 38 and a half years. This wasn't a history book. It's picking out anecdotes that are going to help us be healthy human beings and Jews, functional human beings and Jews. It's helping us understand where the pitfalls are. So here we have a picture of Jews who only recently got the Torah. Now they got a whole list of things to do. So obedience to the Torah is front and center. Now, here the question was, what Moses wanted to do was also bring their minds into it, as we'll talk about. One second, there's a question on the chat, I believe. Does the divine soul still feel the mitzvah when it's done without intention? It is only the animal soul that is not engaged? Okay, I'm trying to make sure, see if I can understand it. What I think you're asking is, if a person puts up a mezuzah just because that's what their grandparents did, and I gave them a kosher scroll, and they're knocking in the nails, and that's it. So, does the divine soul feel it? Does their holy soul appreciate the mitzvah? The answer is yes, because now their body did something good. Does the divine soul also feel the deficiency of not having engaged their personality? Yes, too. And the more they engage what you're calling the animal soul, the normal rationale, the happier the divine soul is. Let me know if that didn't answer. Okay. Text 7. No. Okay. This is from Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sachs. He says there are 3 conditions for asking a Jewish question. Because remember, asking a Jewish question, asking a question about Judaism, someone can come in here, and it happens all the time, not believe. And what they're doing is they're going to ask questions to try to validate their perspective of not believing that Judaism. Some can come in with a question that's actually an open question. They want to understand. Say, I'm open to this. That's a very, very different question. Now, it could be that even though they asked that question, my answer didn't satisfy them. That's on me. That's possible. But the approach of the questioner is critical. And we all know that sometimes in our conversations with people in business, whatever, sometimes when the person is responding, we're just preparing our rebuttal. It's not we're open to what someone else is saying. And I think that's a common human thing. Not a great thing, but it's a common human thing. And when it comes to the Judaism, we're trying to say, let's be open. Text 7. There are 3 conditions for asking a Jewish question. The first is that we seek genuinely to learn, not to doubt, ridicule, dismiss, reject. Yeah, that is what the wicked son of Dagada does. Ask not out of a desire to understand, but as a prelude to walking away. So the question sometimes, it's really a statement with a question mark at the end. It's like I don't, page 158. I don't accept it. Here's why. So we want to have an open mind. We want to learn. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. I want to understand. Second is that we accept limits to our understanding. Understand that I've got limits. Not everything is intelligible at any given moment. If you think about it historically, there were scientists at the beginning of the 20th century who believed that virtually every major discovery had already been made, not suspecting that the next 100 years would give rise to Einstein's relativity theory, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Gödel's theorem, proof of the Big Bang, origin of the universe, discovery of DNA, and the coding of the human genome. There are people, right? I think it was the head of IBM in the 20s, 30s, whatever, wanted to close the patent office. Everything's been done. Everything's been invented. Smart people said that. In relation to Torah, there were many German and American Jews in the 19th century who could not understand Jewish prayers for a return to Zion and delete them from the prayer book. Having a homeland in Israel was unfathomable. at that period of time. So they said, take it out of the prayer book. Today, looking at Israel and having our Israel, that's even observe it or not, that's such a powerful thing. What happened? We became smarter? No, the world changed.
At the Salute to Israel parade,
Yeah.
there was an entire block of ultra-Orthodox in front of the plaza who were calling Zionism and Israel an abomination.
That's really sad. That's an abomination, isn't it? We can't control all our brothers and sisters. It's very sad. It's what we would call in Jewish law a chilul Hashem, a desecration of the religion, to have people who dress religious saying that. These facts should induce in us a certain humility. Not every scientific orthodoxy survives the test of time. Not everything in Judaism that we do not understand is unintelligible. The very features of Jewish life one generation finds difficult, the next generation might find the most meaningful of all. Faith is not opposed to questions, but it is opposed to the shallow certainty that we understand. What we understand is all there is. So let's be open. And number 3 is 159. The third is when it comes to Torah, we learn by living and understanding by doing. I remember years ago, I was studying with someone who's moved out of town. He's a brilliant guy. And we used to study a spiritual text. And I was probably 26 years old. And he said to me, can you explain to me what the Shabbat is? And then he said, I understand that I won't understand it until I practice it, but give me, explain it to me what it means rationally. And that stuck in my head. I went into my, whatever my explanation was, but it stuck in my head. And when I drove away, I was thinking, well, that's an interesting thing he said. I think he said that he accepts that he won't understand it until he experiences it. Because I had never thought of it that way. And I was pondering that. It made sense to me. But I never thought of it that way, that sometimes we understand by doing. If you're going to teach someone to be a doctor, to do things, they're going to read it in the textbook, but they're going to understand when they do. So we learn by living and understand by doing. We learn to understand music by listening to music. We learn to appreciate literature by reading literature. There's no way of understanding Shabbat without keeping Shabbat. No way of appreciating how Jewish laws of family purity enhance a marriage without observing them. Judaism, like music, is something that can only be understood from the inside by immersing yourself in it.
Observing them or
Experiencing them. Yeah, observing is probably a shallower word. Good point. Given these caveats, Judaism is a faith that more than any other values the mind, encouraging questions, engaging us at the highest levels of intellectual rigor. Every question asked in reverence is the start of a journey towards God. And that, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean that a person accepts God. Someone who's been a friend here for decades, years ago, I asked him if he would, we had Sunday morning classes, and we used to talk about a lot of these theological things, making a dinner journal, and Malki was doing, and it was about my story with Chabad or something like that. I sent him an email. Can you give me a few lines just of you and Chabad? So he said, I'm boring. I said, come on, just give me a few lines. So he wrote back 3 things. He wrote to me, you're one of my closest friends. Number 2, I love Sunday mornings. Number 3 is, I think I believed in God more before I met you. And we printed it, because the thing is, he wasn't even asking questions. Now we're having questions. He wasn't accepting the answer. Okay, but now we were having a conversation. That's also really important. In open conversation, and where people end up is up to them. Text 8:8. A heretic asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Koch. This is something that's from the Medrash, and Rashi notes it in the Torah. He asked the great rabbi, do you not admit that God foresees the future? Rabbi Yeshua replied, yes. I'm sorry. And the heretic retorted, but the passage states, and he became grieved in his heart. God. So If he foresaw the future, why did he do something that would bother him? Rabbi Yeshua replied, was a son ever born to you? Yes. And what did you do? I rejoiced and ensured that everyone else rejoiced as well. But did you not know that he is destined to die? So it responded, at the time of joy, there's joy. At the time of mourning, there's mourning. And Rabbi Yeshua replied on 161, so is it with God. Though he knew that the people would sin and that he would destroy them, he created them for the sake of the righteous people who would arise from them. Okay, so without getting to what he said, we have this idea of a questioner. And the Rebbe in 8b wants to learn from that questioner. The heretic asks questions in a heretical style. How can you believe that God foreknows the future? Of the passage states he became grieved in his heart. His point is that it is impossible to believe that God knows the future. A Jew asks the same question in the opposite manner. We are absolutely certain that the Torah is true, that God foresees the future. However, we seek to understand how there can be a change of what causes changes in God's mind. In other words, I believe in God, right? There's no surprise there. Someone asked me, how could God allow the whole Holocaust? I don't have an answer. I'm bothered by it. Now, if my belief in God was totally predicated on an idea that there's a supreme being who is infinite and all good and gives the world all obvious goodness, that would be an absolute a refutation. I believe in God. The source of my belief in God and my reasoning surrounding belief in God does not have as an ingredient that God gives us everything we want, because I accept that there's a God, a good God, who created a world that has left to its own devices is a jungle. I'll ask questions. The Rebbe asks questions about how a good God and the suffering we see in the world. The Holocaust was the suffering of one person 6 million times, but the individuals, it still happens. Thank God it doesn't happen 6 million times in one shot, but it happens. So that is of course we want to ask questions. Of course we want to turn to God and say, how does this work? But if it's saying, I don't believe there's a God because there's suffering in the world, to me, if the only reason you were going to believe in God is because believing in God would mean there's no suffering in the world, you got a problem. Then you're right. But if the belief in God is thinking about creation, thinking about how it's possible, how the first amoeba could have possibly arisen, looking at the world around us, and then seeing the signs that support God, our own history, generation after generation of what our grandparents and great-great-grandparents told us happened at Sinai. And then we say, but I have a problem. What's the problem? How could a good God allow suffering? It's a problem. The question should be asked. The person who doesn't ask the question doesn't believe in God or doesn't care. Ask. But it's not coming from a saying, now I refuted the existence of God. So we're saying this style of it is important. The approach of the question. So now let's get back to Moses. Why did God say to Moses, when Moses comes to God, we said in the beginning, he says, the people want to send spies. What do you say, boss? And God says, if you want, you can send. Say yes or no. Why did the reason God left the decision to Moses with, if you want to send, the purpose of sending the spies was to activate the we will listen dimension of Judaism. In other words, we will, not that we will obey. Listen means we will understand, enabling the people to understand how they would conquer Israel. God said, my whole point is, yes, I don't want you to go there like lemmings. I want you to understand. I want you to look and say, okay, God's behind us, but this is how we're going to do it. It's going to be working through our natural means, this is how we're going to go in, and we can see with our eyes. This is a beautiful land that God's giving us. We want you. I want you to appreciate it. The person, therefore, the dispatch itself had to come from them. It said, good. They want to, let them do it. If that's what they want, if that's what you want, you're using your human intellect. Do it. It had to be done because they felt it necessary to send spies, not because God instructed. If God tells them to send spies, then they're lemmings again. He was saying, yes, if that's what they want and that's what you want, go for it. Text 9b. That's what this whole exercise was about. And this is from the Rebbe, Also, God had indeed informed the Jews that Israel is a good and prosperous land, but God wanted the Jews to understand this truth on their own. Moses therefore instructed the spies to bring back some of the fruit. When the people would behold the fruit, they would surmise that it is truly a good and prosperous land. Their desire for Israel would be kindled, not because God had instructed it and they had pledged to obey him, but because they would truly want to go. So now they would be in a position where they say, God took us out of Egypt. God said, take the land. God is going to help us take the land. But look, here's what we're going to do. And look how beautiful the land is. They're enthusiastic. Their mind and their hearts are engaged in the process. And God is the wind at their back. That's good. Not just saying, listen, I don't know where we're going, but this is what God wants us to do. Text 9c. The same applies to the first part of the mission. To discover the surest methods to conquer Israel, page 164. God's purpose was to enable the Jews to understand, not just be told that the land could be conquered. So if someone says to me, am I supposed to, Friday night, am I supposed to make Kiddush? Absolutely. But I'm not just say yes and tell them how much wine you're supposed to drink and the words. We'll talk about it so that they'll be engaged. It's not just dry doing. God didn't want entry into Israel to be dry doing either. Text 10 and 165. Not only was Moses unconcerned that God's ambiguous response portended a negative outcome, he was elated over the new opportunity. He said, great, God is saying it's up to me. That means God wants to engage the human intellect. That's great. And go back and say, guys, it's up to us. We're going to do it. Jews would now be empowered to serve God because they chose to, rather than because they felt compelled to. They felt by God's instructions. Do what God wants because they understood it to understand to be good and want to do it. Be spontaneously synchronized with God's will. And now let's do the key points. The foundation of Judaism is to accept the truth of God and to obey him without thinking. It's a relationship. God is God. Now, the ultimate form of Judaism is to probe, ask, and understand so that our minds and hearts are aligned with God's thoughts and wishes. Number 3 is the license to think is not a license to reject, but there's a risk that some might take it that way. Next, to avoid this, it helps to remember that we don't ask to satisfy our curiosity, but because God wants us to connect with him through our minds and hearts. This shapes the way we formulate our questions. Rather than questioning the Torah's truth, we seek to understand it. If we fail, we don't reject. We simply keep looking. Finally, sending the spies was the first experiment with an independent thought. Although the spies misused their license, we learn from their mistakes and get it right. So, I don't know if there are any questions, but what shares that in the very early years of being here, I was a good friend who should live and be well. I've known 31 years. We became friendly, and you may have heard this from me before, I remember, but his wife was a little reluctant because she had heard Chabad is a cult or something. So he asked me some questions, and I answered it as much as I could. And we had a condo here in Spring Ridge, and invited him and his wife over for dinner. And I wanted to hear any questions she has, and we spoke. And she said, you really answered my questions, but my friend, she said, she gave me the name of a friend, Rosie, said she really knows about Judaism, and she could probably ask better questions because she has this impression of Chabad. I said, does she eat? I'll have her over for dinner. So she said she'll try to get it. It never happened, but I was in this guy's office one day, a few months after that, I guess. And his wife was in the office too, and the secretary buzzes through that for his wife that Rosie's on the phone. I said, 1 second, is that Rosie? The Rosie? She said, yeah. I said, the office was in Broadway. I said, we're not far from Elizabeth. It's like whatever it was lunchtime. I said, I'll buy lunch. Let's go out to Jerusalem Pizza in Elizabeth. We'll meet, and she can ask me all her questions. So it's a great idea. So the guy gets on the phone, says, fortuitously, Rabbi Herson happens to be here. And he suggested that maybe we go out for lunch. And this way you can ask your questions. I only heard one side of the conversation, but he got a little red. And he said she doesn't want. So I said, okay. He said she never met me. Said, can you just ask her, since she apparently knows everything I stand for and about me, would she consider or assume that I'm a narrow-minded guy? He asked her, and the answer was a very emphatic yes. So I said, okay. So so we won't have lunch. I'm just asking her to consider who's willing to listen to who. I want to hear everything. She's not even, doesn't want to even open her mind to talk to me. And she was, I see her around. She said, okay, we went to his house for like 3 hours. And she came in with her questions. She had a Rolodex of questions. And then she went and said, I have another friend who really knows Judaism, probably do a better job with this. But the point was, it was, just open I'm not asking you to like me. Just give me a chance to talk about it. Let's hear. And from then, when people would ask and say, call up and say, what kind of synagogue is this? Because whatever it is. So my answer was always a Jewish one. So they say, Farm, conservative, we're Jewish. Come in here. But then I started to say, we tend to appeal to open-minded people. If you can be open to the spectrum without pigeonholing us, my guess is you'll be okay here, because people see me and they're off the bat. They know exactly everything I think. Part of that is this. It's just you want to be open, not just come in questions because we're trying to prove a point. Maybe our geniuses of thousands of years knew something. They didn't just blindly believe in a God that doesn't make sense. So the thing is, we will accept God, but to ask questions, to deepen, to really to see where our faith is up to, to strengthen ourselves. That's where Torah wants us to go. There are no questions. You got a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt you. Back on text 4. Nadav and Abihu
Yeah.
were the greatest Jews of their time.
I think some of the greatest Jews says. It says the greatest Jews.
Some of the greatest.
Some of the
Jews
Jews.
their time.
It does. They were.
Haven't we heard of them? I mean,
It's in there.
well, no.
No, it happens to be that they're Aaron's sons, and from the way it's described, Moses says to Aaron, apparently they're greater than me and you. So it's a longer discussion, but yes.
Why?
I can't measure greatness.
But that also reflects on Moses' humility.
That's also true. Because it's beyond this conversation, but from the way the Torah frames it, it makes sense. God said I was. I don't want to give a soundbite that's just going to create more questions, but it's.
And
yeah,
the foundation of Judaism is to accept the truth of God and to obey Him without thinking.
That's foundation, but the structure is to get into thinking. In other words, my parents, my wife wants something from me, ask me for something. The foundation is they want it, I want to get it done. Now I got to figure out what that is. Maybe something like I can't get done. And my wife's not God, and neither is my father. Maybe what I think is not a good thing. But the point is that when someone matters to you, there's space in your life. So if they want something, you want it. Now you have to figure out, hear details later. That's not the foundation. That's the structure.
But at the same time, somebody once challenged, I forget if it was Akiva or Rashi, to state the essence of Judaism while standing on one foot.
That was Hillel.
And his response was, "Thou shalt not do unto others what is abhorrent to you."
The rest is commentary.
Yes, the rest is commentary. That was. Yeah, that's Hillel. That's correct. I think all of this supports that. Rhonda, question.
Okay, so so the fact that the spies came back and the people doubted, they got punished for not following obediently.
For not trusting God.
Right, but I'm saying you're saying that people should question. So for those who are questioning faith, it seems like they got punished.
They certainly got punished. That's part of it. And the idea, that generation, for them to question whether there's God, that wasn't like us, because this is a generation that came out of Egypt. They saw the splitting of the sea. They got the Torah a year before. So the idea is, does God exist? Like we have here, that question, that wasn't a question they had. They knew God exists. They were getting manna every day, but they didn't trust God. And so they went with their own fears and their own calculations rather than trusting God. Now, it's hard to give a parallel because none of us is God. But for my child, when I say this is what you do, and I explain it to them, for them to say, but no, it's not. I'm not going to do it because I don't trust that you have my best wishes in mind, my welfare in mind. That's insulting. And for them, probably stupid, because I if they're a kid, I probably know better than them. But I'm not God. I make mistakes too. But the idea is, assuming that I had something where I really did know better than them, that's why I was making the case. All right, that'll work. Okay. Have a great week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.